Hello, hello, world. Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of CoachesCorner.health. I am Leslie Goddard. I'm one of your hosts of this channel. I'm a mindset and emotional awareness coach for women, and I work with mission driven women who want to make a bigger impact in the world by pursuing their passion project or maybe exploring entrepreneurship. And I show them that it's possible to have both, that they don't have to choose, and that when they develop an unstoppable mindset, learn how to manage their emotions, protecting their time, it's possible for them to keep doing what they love, to get things done more efficiently, and still spend quality time with their friends and loved ones. Over to you, Andy.
Beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
I'm Andy Lidstone. I am the unconditional coach. I do a lot of boundaries work with my clients, and we work on what it's like to have connection and boundaries,
Mhm.
and use boundaries to create connections. So, yeah, I'm excited to get into this conversation with you today. It's a one that's near and dear to my heart. Um, I have often felt weak. Um, I have often wondered about this question of weakness in men, and I didn't relate to um, a lot of the things that were being said about why men feel weak. You know, I didn't relate to sharing your emotions as a sign of weakness. I didn't feel that. That wasn't my experience. And I didn't relate to a lot of it's weak to to hug another guy or tell another guy I love you. I did those things a lot. um and so what I did though is I did feel weak a number of times, and you froze, so I'm just going to keep talking. So weakness in men is our discussion for today, and I really wanted to bring this up because there's lots of discussion that we could have and have had, and that many people do have. And throughout coaching, I've realized that a lot of guys do relate to some of those stories. A lot of guys have had their moms or their dads or their husbands or their wives or their siblings tell them they're weak, call them weak, or call them names that mean they're weak. Names that I won't repeat here for various reasons. Um, and I'd like to discuss that a little bit today about what it looks like to actually feel weakness, feel like you're weak, feel like I'm weak as a man. And what I've also discovered is that a lot of women relate to this too, because a lot of women are growing up and leaning into their masculine energy. They want to become less weak, or they want to, or they want to be perceived as strong and independent, and a lot of the masculine energy um, is what creates um, some of that strength. A lot of women are coming from their masculine energy to create that strength. Um, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Sorry.
Um,
I was just
that
saying to
happens.
my husband that, of course, the internet, there was a connection, some kind of system change right in the middle. So I missed everything that you said.
That's okay. That's okay. Weakness in men.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, I just kind of introduced the subject and why I wanted to talk about it. Yeah, it's this concept of men and being weak, and I relate to being weak. What I don't relate to is the reasons people think men feel weak. Um, I don't feel that sharing emotions is weakness. I never have felt that. I do know men. I've coached men. I've I've talked to men who feel that, who feel that that sharing their emotions is weak. But that isn't the majority of men I talk to. There are a few, but that isn't the majority of men. So although that is a story that I've heard, it isn't the biggest story. Um, what I've heard is men being called weak by those they care about, by their parents, their siblings, their spouses. You're weak if you X, Y, or Z. You know, It's a lack of masculinity if you don't X, Y, or Z, and it's almost a form of manipulation. So they're removing a man's masculinity. They're emasculating a man to get him to do what they want, because what they want is their version of strength, when it isn't necessarily the same definition that the man they're talking to has, or the boy they're talking to has. Um, and I also mentioned that a lot of women, not all, but there is a growing number of women who are leaning into their masculine energy and looking to be strong, independent women, and they're also afraid of being seen as weak. So this isn't exclusive to men, although it is more generally a masculine style problem. So there's more men who identify with it. However, there are women who deal with the same thing as well. So yeah, it's about weakness.
Yeah, well, I have a question. Let's before we get into the topic of weakness. I want to know, like, what really constitutes strength. Like, what is considered to be a strong man? What is considered to be a strong woman? When it comes to just whether it's through emotions, through lifestyle. What like really? What is that? Like, really, what is the definition to that that you are seeing out there? People are saying is the truth.
That's a wonderful question. I listened to an interview with Terry Crews recently, and I think he's my new favorite celebrity. I've enjoyed him for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I've liked his acting, and I've actually looked up his wiki and some of his career, and I've liked him for a while. But he talks about weakness and strength as well. So a lot of times, us young men or young boys were taught that weakness is victory, weakness is dominance, weakness is, or sorry, strength is dominance, strength is victory, strength is being able to conquer someone or something else. We're taught this as young boys, and we're usually first taught that that strength is to conquer your emotions. Um, you know, I scrape my knee, conquer your emotions, stop crying, get up and keep going. Right. Now, that's not the words that are used, but that's what we're taught. So a lot of us grow up thinking that strength is not so much not showing our emotions, but only showing the aggressive emotions, only showing those ones that push us forward. Um, and so a lot of guys are taught that. What I'm seeing in the world is that although many of us got that message as kids, most of us didn't teach our children that message on purpose. Most parents are not trying to communicate that message to their young boys.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are exceptions. Some are. Some men and even some moms, some dads and some moms are trying to communicate that message to their children, but they're rare. They're not the majority by any stretch. Most families, most parents want their children to believe that kindness is strength, that perseverance is strength, that helping another person is strong. Compassion is strong. Showing your emotions, being able to cry, and being able to be happy, being able to celebrate someone else's victory. Most parents want to teach that to their children, those things as strength. But just like life doesn't come with a manual, neither does parenting. Although millions of people have written manuals for parenting, most of us don't read those, and we don't really understand them when we do anyway. Having been a parent, I know what that feels like. So we grow up getting this concept that we are weak if we don't win, we are weak if we don't dominate, when that's not actually the message that our parents most of the time are trying to teach us. And it's certainly not the message that our authority figures, teachers and group leaders and youth group leaders and that sort of stuff. It's also not the message they're trying to teach us. However, it's often the message we get because there are contests and there are sports and there are victories and there are wins and there's this whole movement that everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a prize. There's a participation ribbon, um, and we shouldn't all get those. And while there's some value in that, the movement against it almost focuses on the strength versus weakness conversation, and we haven't really figured out the balance as to what strength looks like. So what
So
does strength look like is a lot of society saying we're getting it wrong, and this is what we all think strength looks like, and it's all of the soft and kind and joining emotions is what society is trying to say.
yeah. And do you think it's getting caught up in the strength of like competition? In other words, we grow up learning to compete for whether, I mean, like years, way in the day, we were competing for food, we were competing for pretty much everything. Even people in the very beginning, when they were like just giving, the government was breaking up the land, and they people were competing to be the first to like put their flag in so that they had the rights to a piece of land so they could build on it, and it became their own. So do you think it could be that that the message of strength has been really around that competing nature? Because you talk about the words of winning, dominating, um, you know, uh, victory, conquering, one of the things I've even heard is like conquer your fears. And I really like to, when I talk about emotions, and especially when it's fear related, I like to talk about more around it's really about facing those fears, because you have to name the fear. You have to, and that so that you can face it, and it's going to be hard. But then once you can do that, you can embrace and then release it. But I think there's just that mindset out there that it's an immediate, we're in a competition to be the best, to do the best. So maybe that is around like the weakness part. Well, if I'm not showing strength all the time, if I'm showing that any type of emotion or any kind of vulnerability, and then I'm being seen as weak, then I'm not being seen as strong, which means
Right.
that I'm not being seen as worthy of whatever the position is that you're in. So
Yeah.
I was just curious if you think that strength really is just because of the competitive nature of us growing up. That's what we're really taught about competing. You go to,
Yeah.
you talk about sports. It's all about
Yeah.
competing.
Yeah. And yes, that is part of the truth. That is exactly where a lot of this comes from, is we have to compete for the things we want. We have to compete for our parents' attention. We have to compete for our education. We have to compete for the things that we want in our lives. We have to compete from very young. We have to start competing. And that is true. And those who don't win a lot end up feeling weak. And again, that isn't necessarily because that's the message that our society is trying to communicate. It's an accidental message. What I think the society is trying to teach now, this hasn't always been true. There has been, historically speaking, our parents, for example, and our generations were taught more about, when to be worthy, conquer to be worthy. However, I think our generation, and even to some extent our parents' generation, started to change that as we were raising our children. And the generations that came up afterwards also changed that with their children. So the message that society is giving out, what I see a lot in the coaching world, what I see a lot in the entrepreneurial world, is this concept of collaboration. It's becoming more and more the mainstream that we work together. And especially during COVID, there's been a lot of conversation around let's join together, join our hands, build this thing together. You might be building a rocket ship and I'm building a restaurant, but we can help each other get those things done, right? And when we can do that. So there's been a lot of this concept of collaboration and teamwork. And rather than winning over the other guy, let's win over the possibilities. right? So that is, and what I'm seeing is a conflict in the message we want to get out to the world and the message that is accidentally getting out to the world. We haven't reconciled the difference yet. So there is a difference between what we're trying to say and what's being heard by the masses. And I think that's where we're at right now in our society, is that we're hearing a different message than what we're saying. And we keep saying that message because we're hearing a different message. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring up this conversation, because I don't think the message anymore is men are weak if you blah blah blah, if you show your emotions, if you don't win. I don't believe that's the message anymore. That is still a message we will hear in our personal lives sometimes. There are at least half of my clients are told that you are weak if you X, Y, or Z. You are weak if you don't pick me up from work every day. You are weak if you don't text me every morning. You are weak if you don't make love to me on my schedule, right? I'm hearing those kinds of things um, from my clients. Not all of them, again, only about half of them. The other half who also feel weak, they feel weak because they're getting a different message than what people are trying to tell them. They're hearing you didn't accomplish this, so you're weak. What people are trying to tell them is, I want to help you accomplish this, or let's get this done. So it's a matter of miscommunication for a lot of it, and for
Mhm.
some of it, it's a matter of manipulation.
Mhm.
Those dangerous relationships are more manipulation, which they are in all kinds of factors.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about, I'm actually loving this topic because I started really thinking about it. I didn't plan for it, but as we've been talking, I was thinking there's also a power struggle almost, because I hear a term that gets thrown around a lot, and even my husband has said it, not necessarily to me, but about other people, and I don't know if he realizes the words, what they really are implying. So the words of who wears the pants in the family.
Hmm.
And so in that instance, that also then I believe um, plays a part in people feeling like they're the weakest link in the family dynamic, and that could be that the woman is more of the alpha female, and the male has decided he is good with her being in that role. However,
Yeah,
then the perception from outside of their family dynamic of this, what they have decided works for them. So I just wanted to talk to you about that particular phrasing because I've
yeah,
heard it. As I said, my husband uses it. I try to explain to him that it's not necessarily about that, but unless people start thinking about what they're saying when they say that particular phrase about someone else, I don't think the narrative. I don't know if the narrative can change. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. See, that's exactly what I was talking about. I believe the narrative is changing, because I do still hear that phrase a lot. I mean, I live in a very redneck part of our country, a very traditional, man is the man of the house, woman stays home, barefoot and pregnant, all that. The part of the country that I live in is very, very one-sided in that direction. However, even in this very traditional redneck kind of an area, there's still a lot of families where the man is um, the emotional center of the family, and the mom is, like you said, the alpha female, the one who leads the family and makes the decisions for the family. And by a lot, I don't mean the majority, but I do mean 25%, like a quarter of us. Never mind when I go into the bigger cities and the bigger centers, and other parts of the country where there are more, um, I guess, less traditional, or more mixed values. There are at least half of the families where they're choosing to change roles as far as who's the decision maker or who's the leader of the family. Um, I know some very great people who've decided to change those two roles. And I'm not even talking about, who works and who stays home, or who does the dishes and who looks after the kids, and who watches the football game. I'm not even talking about those things. Those things also change. But I'm talking about who is the leadership of the family and who is the person who supports the leadership. Traditionally, it's been the man being the leader and the woman being the support in the leadership, but that isn't the case in a lot of families anymore. And because it's not the case in a lot of families anymore, there is still a number of people judging those people, especially in this redneck part of the country. Um, making comments like, "Who wears the pants in that family?" And they don't respect or hang out with those families where they've decided to switch the power roles. Um, and there are lots of families who have switched those roles. Therefore, they are respecting each other when the traditionalists don't. So they're finding community. They're finding the ability to share roles. They're finding the ability to find strength in growth, in new ways of thinking, in teaching their children new ways of acting in the world. So this concept of strength, this concept of leadership, this concept of weakness, there are still people who judge us, but that message is changing. Yes, it still exists. And we're kind of in a flux with that message right now. It's not the majority. It's close to half in a lot of the urban centers where there's a lot of people with modern values. And in the more rural areas, it's still very, very traditionalists. However, it's changing even in the rural areas. So I believe that message is changing, and I don't believe it's going to actually shift completely one direction or the other in any time soon. I don't think it actually should. I think we should have a mix of values. That's what brings robust diversity to our world. And I like that. So, as far as what weakness is, as far as who wears the pants in the family, I mean, first of all, the very concept of who wearing the pants, does that mean that men can't wear dresses and women can't wear pants? I mean, come on now. Are we living in the 30s? Like the last year 30s? The last century 30s?
I think
I
some
mean, we're
people
all
would like that. Some people do want to turn back time to the good old days.
right, right. And I specifically mentioned the 30s because the 30s were the Great Depression and
Hmm.
nobody wants to live there.
No,
Right. So I specifically use that example because yeah, that's exactly it. I don't think we want to go back there.
no. So here's the thing I wanted to talk about too is so the traditional family dynamic, like back in the 50s,
Hmm.
was the woman again, even though she might have gotten a very good education. When we're talking about like middle class America to upper class, the woman would get that education, but the premise of getting that education was just to be educated,
Yep.
um, and then uh, and then to find a good husband and become the housewife, taking care of the home, the children. The husband would go out and find a way to provide for that family. And so now, traditionally, those roles have changed a little bit. As an example, in my own home, my husband is the one who does the cooking. He does the cleaning. He does the laundry. He
Yep.
also has, he has worked other when he is not in doing something specifically, like he'll take time off. He only works a few months every year, and so the months that he's not, he takes on those that role of the traditional what the wife was considered. And then step into the role mainly to be the person who is providing for the family. Doesn't mean he's not providing for the family, but I look from the outside world as if I've stepped in that role. He stepped into the role that traditionally women would hold. And
Yeah.
so the dynamic has changed. And I think our life has always been where I've been more so than he has the main breadwinner in our
Hmm.
relationship, in our marriage. And I don't say that to make him feel bad or look bad, and he
Right.
doesn't, because we have an understanding. It has worked for us, and for him, there has been moments where he has been the main breadwinner. So I'm just curious too, is like we're not even looking at from within now with us talking to each other, defining strength and weakness, but now we're looking from the outside world with all of these changes in people's roles
Right.
that can be considered, well, who then this phrase, who wears the pants in the family?
Right.
And I think one of the reasons why he's used this phrasing is based on, someone in particular who had an opinion with him, and he felt that the opinion was not his own, but it was coming from his wife,
Right.
that it was his wife's opinion.
Mhm.
And to me, when you're in a relationship with someone, um, the opinions, if you agree with it, it becomes your own opinion. It's not the wife telling you what to say. It's not the husband telling you what to say. So I've tried to explain that to him, but as I said, this when I believe maybe he's still playing it, and maybe it could be that our generation, because he is now 61, it could be our generation still hasn't caught up to
Right.
this new phrasing, to this new world that's starting to say, no, weakness isn't really about roles. Weakness is not about who's the main breadwinner. Weakness is not about who makes the decisions or who wears the pants in the family. I
Mhm.
think, really, if we're going to talk about weakness, we could look at it from a way where we can look at what are our strengths, and then what are not our strengths, instead of like calling them, I don't know, maybe changing the wording even more, like what's our strengths, what can we work on, rather than labeling it, because I think that's when labels become really dangerous, because then that's when people's feelings get hurt. That's when people get defensive and shut down, and then the conversation is lost. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are now in your own experience of, you were married. You're not married now, but you were married for a long time. You have two adult children, and as you see them in their relationships, what's your observation when it comes to this particular topic today around weakness in men? Like, how do your kids navigate that?
That's a brilliant question. First of all, I had a similar experience to you in that my wife earned more money than I did for most of our marriage, um, and we were both happy with that. We never, I won't say never, we rarely ever argued about money. Money was not a big concern for us. It never has been. I mean, sure, we wanted more than we had, but who doesn't, right? So that wasn't a big thing for us. Um, and for the most part, she led a lot of the aspects of our family. The faith we chose, how we practiced it, that was mostly her. And in some areas, I was looked at by our community, specifically around the church community, but also in the homeschooling community. We homeschooled our kids, so in that community as well, I was looked at as the traditional man because both homeschooling and church are very traditional styles of lifestyle. And therefore, I was asked my opinion on things when she was the one actually going and doing the service. Like she'd be serving in the church as the wife often does, and serving in our community as the wife often does. And I would be sitting around drinking beers, although it wasn't necessarily beer. It was drinking. We were drinking. It was usually pop or coffee or something. But I'd be sitting around with the guys, gabbing and talking. Sitting around the barbecue with the men. Which is another funny thing because I hate barbecuing. We actually sold the two barbecues we were given because we didn't want them, either one of them. But anyway, so the the concepts of the roles and how they played with my kids. Both of my kids don't want that traditional um, experience of the man being the man of the house or wearing the pants. They do want a shared role, or sometimes um, a chosen role. So what what I've experienced and what I think they're experiencing now, I could be wrong. I haven't talked to them on this subject for a couple of years now. is with some issues that they feel, experienced in or equipped for, they want to take the leadership, both my son and my daughter. And for some roles, for some, you know, scenarios where they feel less equipped in, they'd rather their spouse or partner take the role or the leadership. So they want shared responsibility, but not as in, let's talk about this and make the decision together. More shared responsibility, as in, you be responsible for these things, I'll be responsible for those things. We will discuss them, but I'll have veto power on these subjects. You'll have veto power on those subjects. You'll decide what to do. We're doing there. I'll decide what we're doing here. And we're still open for discussion. We're still going to do this together, but we don't have to have like a committee meeting every time a decision needs to be made, right? So that's kind of what I think they're both trying to do. It's what I wished my wife and I eventually came to. I think it's what we were trying to do. We just didn't figure out how to do it yet. And I think that's kind of the difference between our generation and the ones coming after us, is that we were figuring those things out and still are in many of our cases, and our kids are much further along that road of figuring out what that looks like. So as far as strength and weakness, we've redefined them to be far more specific about what I think strength looks like. So I believe the conversation is changing into, this is what strength is for me. This is what strength is for my family. This is what strength is for my spouse, for my children, for my job, for my career. I want to work in a job for a company that shares that vision of strength, that vision of what it means to be a powerhouse. Um, One of my favorite phrases is powerful, uh, helping people become powerful, helping become people rediscover their power, their authority, their masculinity, and not the toxic masculinity that is so common in our culture these days, not just in experience, but in conversation. Rarely is masculinity brought up when it isn't paired with toxic. So I want to have conversations around the masculinity that isn't toxic, the masculinity that not only is helpful, but is productive, is the masculinity that gets things done. And yes, I had to pause for a second there because that isn't how I would normally say that. So yeah, so that's my perception of what's going on with my kids and what happened in my family. Um, it's becoming more of a choice now. Again, I live in a part of the country where that is still in the evolution stages, and I've also been in parts of the country where that is the standard expectation from families. That if you don't believe that, then you're like, the traditionalists are the ones that are ostracized in some of those communities, right? So yeah, that's my experience.
Well, I liked what you said, that your kid, that the previous generation, ours, is still working on it, and that your children, their generation, is really starting to figure it out. I think in this case, I truly believe that, exactly, because I think that young people now, because self-development is so mainstream, they've become more aware of, we can actually create tools to help us. Tools meaning practices, whether it's journaling or meditation, whether whatever type of like mindset work, even um, the boundaries work. They are realizing that there's these tools. Now they're implementing these tools into their lives. And I think then that leads into that whole collaboration part where you were talking in the beginning, where now we're talking more about collaborating rather than, there's strength in collaboration rather than strength in me being competitive. And they're sharing their roles. They're sharing leadership roles, which
Yes.
I really love. And I think that's pretty powerful. And one of the things is, in on my like one of my main things is I want to be able to empower and inspire and encourage the generation behind me, and so that they can do the same for the generation behind them, and so forth. That ripple effect, like throwing a
Yeah.
stone across the lake, and it's rippling. It's you're skipping the stone and it's just doing its thing. I want to be that to be a reality. So we may have been still figuring it out, and we may have tried some things. We're more stubborn. We might give
Yeah.
up quicker. And then you get the generation now who is trying, they're trying different things, the tools that are out there. Some of them now, their generation behind them is now figuring out a better model to use to creating better tools and better skills. And so it's going to keep getting better. The generations are going to build it and build it. I forget where it was. I listened to something and it just escapes me, but someone once said that I had listened to that we're going to build something. We talked about it. The Atom Project, the movie,
Yes.
The Atom Project. And the father in the movie said that we may create something, we might build like or invent something that we won't finish, but the next generation will. And so I think that's what's been happening with our generation, because now we're in this mainstream, we are floating around and all of this information, this self development. There is permissions in place that we can, better ourselves. And the younger generation now is like looking at that. Well, this is what I want to do. They're being more bold and creating better tools. And they're now inspiring the generation behind them to come up and start thinking that way too. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things, is that we are creating something. Even you and I talked about this earlier this week, that we're in that we both created something that we work with our clients with, but at some point, someone's going to take the baton
Yes.
and finish it. They're going to carry they're going to take the torch and they're going to carry it forward around what we do, because what we do is we inspire people around
Yeah.
mindset and emotions and boundaries and self-love and all of those things. And the people that we inspire and we encourage and help transform their lives, they're going to bring that to the people in their lives. And it's
Yeah.
going to affect those people. And
Yeah.
again, and so on and so on. So, yeah, I think it's interesting about self development that we can talk about this topic more positively than we might have been able to back in the 50s, probably.
Yeah.
We'd,
Or even in the 80s and early 2000s.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because I never believed that people could collaborate with each other. I always saw competition out there.
Yeah.
Not that I was saying that I wanted to compete, but what I saw was the world reflecting back to me that in order for you to get anything, in order for you to have anything, in order for you to be anything, you had to compete for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the message.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm liking that the message is changing. It's encouraging for me, and this concept of competition, it isn't bad. We I actually am a big sports fan. I really enjoy watching different kinds of sports. I like watching people compete, men and women. I love that. I really enjoy watching it, especially when they have the choice as to whether or not they want to compete. Athletes have chosen to compete, right? Parents don't have to,
Hmm.
right? Coworkers don't have to. Companies don't have to. Athletes choose to. So the competition is valuable. And I do think there is a good reason to have competition. I don't think it should be the cornerstone of our society. I do think it should be a large portion of our society. It's one of the ways that we grow and become better people is by competing. Is by helping the cream rise to the top
Hmm.
and learning from those who do so that the rest of us can rise as well. Not so that we rise to the top, but so that we can rise, so that we can bring the whole society up with us. And we need people rising to the top in order to do that. We need some people coming to the top of their field in order for the rest of us to learn how that happens so that we can also come up with them. So the whole society rises up rather than only a few coming to the top and the rest staying at the bottom.
Mhm.
And although that is happening in many parts of our world and many aspects of our world, in many features of our world, I believe more and more now, more and more people are wanting to collaborate and bring the rest of the world up with them. And I think that's the thing that's changing. What what I'm finding is that weakness is less about what I bring to the world and more about what I choose to be selfish about. What I'm finding that people are deciding are choosing consciously when they realize that they have these subconscious identities, these subconscious thoughts, and they decide they want to change them. What they're changing them into is no, weakness is not a lack of conquering or a lack of winning. Weakness is choosing to be selfish with my skills, choosing to be selfish with my heart, choosing to be selfish with any of the gifts that I have, anything I can do for myself or for other people. Keeping that to myself, that's weakness because now I'm scared to share what I have in in case somebody steals it from me. I saw this first in the writing industry a few years ago when I was listening to a lot of podcasts and consuming a lot of content around writing and becoming an author. And authors were talking about don't worry about copyright. Don't worry about whether somebody steals your idea because unless they steal your entire story word for word, even if they steal the outline you're writing your book from, they will not use your words. They will not have your perspective. They cannot write your story. So even if all the elements are the same, it won't be your story. Two authors can write the same story and not come out to be the same story. They can even call it the same name. As a matter of fact, it's common wisdom within the writing world that there are no new stories. All the stories have been told before. All we can do is retell them in a different way. So we're already copywriting from somebody else anyway. Like we're already stealing from somebody else anyway. We might not even know who they are or have ever read the story before, but we're not creating original stories. And the concept there said instead of worrying about who's going to steal my idea, why don't we share it around with a few people whose opinions we value, whose values we enjoy, we share, and get their input so we can make our story better, so that we can have story, a stronger story, not a weaker story. Weakness is selfish.
Mhm.
Being selfish is weakness. And then I started hearing that in the entrepreneurial world, and I started hearing that in the coaching world. And part of why we're collaborating with this is because we both believe that. We both believe that people are stronger when they work together. That keeping things to yourself is weakness, right? So this is the concept, and this is what I like to see in the world, and this is one of the reasons why I like to see collaboration. Why I'm enjoying the personal development world, the coaching world, because there is more collaboration, more teamwork, more building together, more creating things as a group rather than oh no, I can't share this with you because you might steal it.
Mhm.
Let's do more of this. Let's collaborate. Let's share. Let's build. Let's make the world a better place.
Yeah, no, I like that. Well, I so you talked a little bit about the weakness is a choice. Do you believe that people um, purposefully choose weakness? Now, I'm not talking about to be selfish or to keep things to themselves, but choose weakness in relationships. Do you think that there's a benefit to choosing to be weak?
Yes. Um, yes and no.
Okay.
Um, I have personal experience with people who choose to be submissive in relationships, choose to let somebody else decide not just the major decisions, but whether or not I go to the grocery store or stay home and look after the kids. Somebody else chooses that. I have personal experience with people who choose to let somebody else have the authority in their life. They'd rather somebody else did. And I have personal experience with people who choose to use the word weak. I want to be weak. Um, and generally speaking, the people that I know who've chosen that see it as a version of strength. I believe, and this is their thoughts. They believe that they are internally strong enough that they can take and work with anything somebody else gives them, and therefore they'd like somebody else to give them everything, their identity, their authority, their autonomy. They want to give all that up, or at least most of it. Now there is limits to that. There are some things they'd rather do themselves, um, but they're not as much as you. They're not as concrete as you might think. And I do know of people who've chosen to be weak in certain scenarios, in their relationships, in their jobs, to be submissive. Now, I also know a lot of people who would get very, very angry if you called their submissive relationship weakness, because they wouldn't. I know some people who do, and some people who wouldn't accept that word at all. Um, so, yeah, I do believe some people have. Now, it's not the majority, not by any stretch is it the majority. Nor do I think it's going to become normal at any point in time. Do I think it's going to become standard? It's possible. I don't see it. Um, but I do believe there's always going to be a few members of society who would rather see themselves as weak to allow somebody else to have that authority. Um, so yeah, I do know of people like that. I am in personal relationship with some people like that, and it's an interesting dynamic for sure to discuss their relationships with them. I've had some unique discussions with some of these people, that's for sure. Um, on the flip side, as I mentioned earlier, most relationships that I know of that are healthy relationships, there's a sharing of power. There's a sharing of authority. Whether it's let's talk about every decision we make, or whether it's you have power over this and I have power over that, or whatever version of it is, there is a sharing of power. Um, there is, of course, plenty of unhealthy relationship where there isn't a sharing of power, where one person is being made to feel weak, but not by their choice. So those are unhealthy relationships. If you're feeling weak in your relationship and you don't want to feel weak in your relationship, that's an unhealthy relationship. If your partner talks about feeling weak and you don't want them to feel weak, that's an unhealthy relationship. Now, that doesn't mean you need to break up. That doesn't mean you need to stop the relationship. It just means there are things you might have to heal. There's things you might want to heal. So there's a careful balance. There's many definitions of what strength looks like. There's many definitions of what weakness looks like, and it's all personal. It's all down to yourself and or your partner or partners if you're in a job or, polyamorous relationship where there's multiple partners. Um, any of those kinds of things where there's somebody else involved, it comes down to working out where the power struggles are and who needs to have authority in those situations, is best equipped to have that authority. And you won't always agree on who is best equipped. That's okay too. Part of life is trying to negotiate who's best equipped to do each thing, right? Who's most able to make these decisions or cause these actions or get these results. And sometimes the answer is both of us, so we do it together, right? You and I are creating a YouTube channel. We're both capable of it. We're equally capable of it. Let's create a channel. Right?
Yep, I agree. No, thank you for sharing that perspective because I was curious. I mean, this is what I love is this is your topic, and I want to be able to contribute in a way that I'll ask you the questions and pull it out of you. But yeah, no, I like your answer to that. That some people actually do choose to be in that submissive role and not necessarily think that it's a weakness, and they believe it is a strength. So I like that that perspective, because it can give someone else, especially someone who might be watching this, and they know people that are like that, or they're in a relationship like that. They can give themselves permission that that is okay because that's their
Yeah.
choice. Yeah, so yeah, this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate that you brought this up. We are getting close to the top of the hour. I don't know if there's somehow you want to close us out.
Well, there's a couple of conversations. Well, I don't know about conversation. A couple of topics I wanted to bring up. Some of the things that we talked about in the tagline, like in the description for this, is do men have all the power? Um, yes. The short answer is yes. Men have all the power. Do all men have all the power? Absolutely not. The majority of the power in our planet exists in the hands of a man. There
Hmm.
are women in power, and that is shifting. Not quick enough, but it is shifting. Um, However, it's in the hands of a few men. It's in the hands of between 1 and 10% of the men. Most men, as a matter of fact, the majority of men who come to me for help are coming to me because they feel a lack of power and authority in their life. They feel a lack of autonomy, a lack of strength. They feel weak, either because they were raised to believe something they didn't agree with, or because they've got somebody in their life who's calling them weak, or because somebody else's definition of strength doesn't match theirs and they can't achieve that. Some version of that. So, do men have all the power? Most of it, yes. Not all of it. There are plenty of women who are gaining powerful positions and more every day. Um, However, not not the vast majority of men. What I'm finding is that a lot of men are being blamed for the problems when it isn't most men causing most of the problems. Just like it isn't most white people causing most of the racial problems. It is a few white people. It is the majority white people. Most of the problems are caused by mostly white people, but it isn't most white people causing the problems. It's only a few. It's the same with virtually any situation where there are problems. A few bad apples spoils the barrel. That's the saying,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, there are a few bad apples. Yeah, there are a few men who are in power. Most of us don't want that. As a matter of fact, a lot of men are in the same position that we find a lot of our friends, our female friends, and a lot of our spouses, a lot of our family members. We also wish those men were not in power, or we wish we personally had more authority and power in our lives.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, men are in the majority of power positions. Not most men. Not most men. Most men don't necessarily want that situation. Most men would rather have a more equal division of power amongst the sexes, amongst the races. At least that's my experience. Now, again,
Hmm.
I can't speak for 4 billion other men, but I can speak for the few dozen or a few hundred that I talk to. So that's my experience. Do men have all the power? Not really. I mean, they do have. Men have it, but not all men. Not all men have the ability to do what they want. The
Hmm.
vast majority of men. As a matter of fact, it's becoming more and more common that men are choosing to have the supporting role in their relationship. Therefore, even in the family, more and more men are choosing to take the supporting role rather than having the authority role.
Right.
So, not as many men as you think have all the power. Um, it's actually your dynamic of you being the majority breadwinner. That's also been my dynamic when I was married, and I know a lot of families for whom that's the case. A lot of families for whom that's the case. That doesn't mean that women are earning as much as men. The men who are earning are still earning far more than women. Just there's a lot of men who are choosing to take lesser positions,
Right.
uh, and let their wives support them. So that's something I wanted to bring up and just address that. Yes, men do have the authority positions, but not all men want that. Not all men have that. Not all men feel empowered to do so. So it isn't all of us who have the problem.
Hmm.
So I wanted to bring that up. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, uh, I think what I was hearing was that in most relationships, the men have all the power, but it doesn't mean that all men in the planet have all the power. It just
Right.
means those that are in those relationships, the majority of those relationships where there is where there is that alpha male and well, of course you have the alpha female, the alpha male, or whatever you call whatever the difference is. I think it's alpha omega, right? So you have the alpha male, and you have the woman who is second in line, and that just seems to be the dynamic. But it does, but in a healthy, I believe in a healthy environment where that is the case, it doesn't mean that my rule is your rule is the only rule. It still means there's discussion. It still means that there's respect in the dynamic. It's just a choice of who has the and how you had said earlier about your kids, like sharing the leadership roles. Somebody
Yeah.
takes the lead on specific things because it's more in their skill set.
Yeah.
Someone else might take the lead in something else, maybe more around the emotional piece of it. Whatever
Yeah.
you choose, just having that decision. And I like that. So now you said you had something else you wanted to share.
Um, if I did, I can't remember what it was now.
That's okay. No, I love the fact that we talked about this topic because, hold on just one second. My husband is home and he's running the water. I said, please turn it off. Okay, so I think I like this topic so much just because there is this attitude out there still, and I'm still trying to figure out where it's coming from about
Mhm.
who is weak. Like, especially when people are using it around that phrase of who wears the pants in the family, or men are weak if they show emotion or vulnerability.
Right.
I think that I still need to do some more research around this because I'm really
Yeah.
curious about who is leading the charge. There's got to
Right.
be, and I'm not saying to place blame, but
Right.
in order to change the narrative, we have to be able to start with the majority that is speaking this way to help show them there is a different way to think about something,
Yeah.
and just send in those little worker ants, to get out these different perspectives, to start
Mhm.
shifting those perspectives, like anything in
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
What we
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the issue, as I mentioned earlier, I think the issue is that a lot of the message now is coming more subconscious than it is consciously. There is still a few people saying those things, but it's not the majority by any stretch. That the majority of that message is coming by accident because we're trying to teach one thing and they're getting something else. So I think that's where the majority of the message now is just a matter of people are hearing something different than what's being said. And that, quite honestly, is the vast majority of where our mindset and emotional unawareness, lack of awareness, where our limitations and problems, where all of those things come from, where they all originate, is because we heard or experienced something different than what the intention was to be. So I think that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, that's great. So yes, we are now at the top of the hour. As always, it's been fun. I loved this conversation. Thank you,
Me
Andy, for
too.
bringing the topic this week. If you liked what you've heard, please press the like button and the subscribe so that you can get notified when we go live again. We go live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Eastern time. And we will be off on, I believe it's the let me take a look. I'm going to look so I can be completely the
I
13th of May, Friday, May 13th. We will not be on live, but we will be live next Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern with
yeah,
another amazing topic, and I can't wait. And again, if you know somebody who wants to hear, who needs to hear this message, or maybe you know someone that you would like to hear this message, then share the channel, share the video, and
share
if
it
you have
out.
any, yeah, and if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. We do check. So let us know. All right. Well, I'm happy
Thank
to
you very
have
much.
been on this conversation with you, Andy. Thank you again for another amazing week. I
Beautiful
hope that you,
conversation. Thank you very
yeah,
much, Leslie.
been amazing. All of you, I hope that you have a great rest of your Friday and an amazing weekend and all of next week. And we will see you next Friday. Bye for
Bye.
now.